Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Actually, as it turned out, as serendipity often does, we flipped the panel, but I don't think we could have had a better setup to the content of this particular panel than John's particular piece. So realizing that we might slightly be behind schedule, I'm going to do away with the extensive introductions of both of these fine gentlemen. Likewise, this presentation is really content-rich, and we want to leave plenty of time for Q&A and exchange with the parties. But I will say that just briefly about Todd, worked for Senator Lieberman up in Connecticut for a number of years as his chief legislative aide. Has worked on such notable pieces of legislation as the Affordable Care Act, the Reinvestment Act, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, some of the responsibility for the legislation after the post 9/11 commission. So he's been on the front line of a number of very key issues from that standpoint. So I'm going to let him go ahead and set this up a little bit, and then we'll get into Sam's presentation.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having us today. I just want to spend about 5 or 6 minutes sort of putting a little bit of the essential economy in context and then turning over the rest of the half hour or so to Sam. The essential economy, the great work that Sam has done with the organization, is really about immigration reform. It's about comprehensive immigration reform and moving legislation through the U.S. Congress. And there are sort of 3 reasons, I mean, there are a bunch of reasons, but 3 key reasons why immigration reform has sort of been sort of keyed up to move these couple years. The first really has to do with the fact that the issue is irretractable in a sense. We have 11 million people who are here illegally, and the idea of deporting those individuals and sending them back to wherever they're from is just feasibly impractical, it's politically impractical, it's economically impractical. So there has to sort of be a solution to find a way to I guess, address the situation of these 11 million individuals. So that has sort of teed up the issue for Congress. The second is sort of is political, which is probably the most powerful. In 2012, President Obama won the Hispanic vote in America by 71% to 27%. Now, the Hispanic vote in 2012 was 10% of the voting bloc. That voting bloc is expected to double by 2030. And frankly, if Republicans continue to lose the Hispanic vote by that margin, they very much may not be a national party anymore. And that is a very significant realization, I think, for the RNC and others who are looking at national elections and saying, we have to move on this issue. The third reason why immigration reform is kind of teed up is because we're seeing an alignment of traditionally unorthodox constituencies. In 2007, when the Bush administration tried to move immigration reform, the business community was in favor of it. They were sort of pushing the administration to move forward on immigration reform. But they have really spoken up this past year and a half to kind of push a bill. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, local chambers of commerce here in Georgia, really support immigration reform because they see it as a workforce issue. The ag community is similar. And obviously, Georgia being a very serious and significant agricultural state is very interested in moving immigration reform in a way that addresses their labor needs. And so what Sam has so expertly done with the essential economy is he's helped make the case or put the numbers together to show why immigration reform is incredibly important to the future of Georgia's economy. And that helps the business community, both here in Georgia and nationally, sort of create a model for like, how are we going to make the case for why this is good for our small towns, our big cities, our manufacturers, and the entire state economy. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to Sam, but I kind of wanted you to get a sense of where the essential economy numbers that Sam is about to present and the great work that he has done sort of fits into this new alignment, political alignment, that has gotten immigration to where it is today. We have a bipartisan bill out of the Senate. D.C. is dysfunctional. Nobody, I think, in the room would argue with that right now. But a bill passing off the Senate floor with 68 votes is quite a remarkable achievement, and 16 Republicans. So there's certainly a bipartisan interest in a bill. There's reasons why it won't move through the House or may not move through the House. But the essential economy argument that Sam's about to make is a very compelling one for why Georgia's business community should seriously consider, continue to consider, make the argument for immigration reform here at home.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. And many of you know that I started the essential economy work with Senator Moody, Dan Moody, the former senator from Johns Creek. And Dan, the great thing about when you retire from the Senate and you're a Republican is you travel. But if you're a Democrat, you actually come to conferences and work. Bad joke. But one of the things I did want to say is what a treat is to see a lot of old friends from the House and the Senate. And there is life after elected life, although the treatment program is more expensive than they will tell you. So thank you for having me, and Dan is traveling today or he would be here, but we're lucky to have Todd Stein, who's a great resource for legislators, policymakers, business people in trying to understand where we are in a range of issues. So Todd and I have had the pleasure to work together over the last several months, and I'm glad he's here this morning. The essential economy work really developed in 2010, and it came from my own desire to no longer argue about immigration. Todd used the word argue, but when you leave the Senate, you move from arguing to storytelling. And so I'm really in the business of storytelling today, and I really don't have an argument, but I do have a story I want to share with you, and I hope it's of value to you, because the one thing that I've wanted to do in my post-elected life is to be constructive and to build on the quality of relationships that I've had in the Senate and in other places, and to be useful in a dialogue primarily about economics. And I would say, with John's comments earlier, that we do have a lot in common. And John, I'll be interested in talking with you afterwards. I also want to say one more thing, that the day that I came up with the concept of the essential economy, I was in my home in Gilmer County, where I live sometimes, and I was explaining to my wife the concept, and she said, you know, you ought to do something about that. And I share that with you because my wife actually came today to hear me, and she's sitting over here in the corner. So thank you for being here, darling. The essential economy can be understood on lots of levels. The concept, how we figured it out, the research we did, communications we've done, leadership efforts we're taking, and then what we're going to do next. But I'm only going to focus just on a couple of pieces, really the concept of the essential economy itself. The board itself is comprised of a lot of people that most of you know. Brian Tolar is here this morning from the Georgia Agribusiness Council, Karen Bremer from the Georgia Restaurant Association, Mike Giles from the Georgia Poultry Federation, others from the hospitality industry. These are the board members of our organization, and we've now been together more than 2 years, and Senator Moody and I chair the organization with a range of economic advisors, including John McKissick from University of Georgia, Jennifer Clark from Georgia Tech, and then Tom Cunningham, who is the Senior Vice President of the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank. These are our economic advisors. We were developed to basically be a nonpartisan group that really focused on establishing the data, the metrics around what we call the essential economy. And I'm not going to go through all of these mission statements, but basically we formed ourselves as a research organization. We are not an advocacy group. We don't have any public policy positions, but we did want to be a credible, reliable provider of a definition of something that we thought needed more understanding, and we called that the essential economy. The essential economy is comprised of 6 sectors that you all will know very well: restaurants and hospitality, agribusiness, construction, landscaping, personal care industry, building and maintenance, and distribution. All of those sectors share some characteristics, not the least of which is they share a workforce. And that workforce tends to be people who don't have a credential. They did not finish, maybe they didn't go to college, maybe they didn't finish high school. There's really no requirement for the job other than the ability to show up and to work. Most of us grew up in a time when our parents or our grandparents worked in those industries. And many of them didn't have a credential. As your previous speaker addressed, this idea of credentialing and licensing has really crept into the way we define work today. But in the essential economy in general, there is no requirement to show up to work. You just have to show up, men or women. So these industries all share that workforce in big numbers. The second characteristic they share is it's very low barriers to entry. You can just walk in. You don't have to take a test in general. Even the job description doesn't require you to have anything. Third, there is upward mobility. Today, one of the industries that is the most rich entrepreneurial industries in our state is the landscaping industry. Because you can show up today as a landscaper and work with a shovel and a hoe. The next day you get a weed eater, the next day you get a chainsaw, the next day you get a truck and a trailer, the next day you're in business. And so there's a lot of entrepreneurism in the essential economy that makes it a rich, rich story for the American dream. And the last thing is that all of the jobs in the essential economy cannot be moved overseas. You can't move a person who makes a bed. It's hard to move a dishwasher to India. So these jobs are here. They're permanent features of the U.S. economy. And you can't move them unless you move the industry. The first thing we did when we defined the essential economy was to say, where does it fit? And if you think about an economy, of our total economy as a pyramid, the top tier being the knowledge economy, which we all know about. We all understand the knowledge economy. That's where data is, communications, big processing, big research. It's at the top tier. But as you work your way down through the white services collar economy, where lawyers and doctors, you work over to specialized manufacturing, government workers, what we call the shadow economy, the undefined economy, which we really don't understand. Right down in the belly of our economy is where the essential economy resides, Patrick. That's where all these sectors are. And it's a big piece of our economy. And when we decided to go into it, Senator Moody and I didn't know the numbers. We just had a hunch that if we got the numbers, that they would be compelling. In a moment, I'll share those numbers with you. The first thing we did is we went to a consulting group in Atlanta called the Boston Consulting Group. Many of you probably have heard of them. And we asked them to help us do a lay of the land. Let's try to understand how the essential economy concept fits into the broader economy. And this was work they did on the essential economy in 2010. And basically what it said is if you look at all the other big clusters, they're called economic clusters, like the knowledge economy, that's a cluster. And you compare it to the essential economy, in Georgia, which had a workforce of about 5 million people in 2010, the essential economy was about 20% of it. That was in 2010. And we looked at the sectors individually, and this just helped us get a basic idea, sort of a glimpse of what this thing was worth. And with this background, Dan and I said, well, you know what? We can look at other states. So we looked a little bit at Connecticut. We looked a little bit at Florida. We looked a little bit at Georgia. And lo and behold, it turned out that the essential economy numbers were pretty much the same across those states. And we took Florida and Connecticut because we thought they would represent different kinds of economies. So based on this data alone, Dan and I put together a request for proposal with the Boston Consulting Group and with the help of our advisors, and we hired Georgia Tech, much to the dismay of Brian Toller and other University of Georgia graduates that are on my board. We hired Georgia Tech to do the study for us on the essential economy over a period of 10 years in the state of Georgia. That research was led in the fall of 2011, and by early 2012, we had our data. And passed out on your table is the report that we issued on the essential economy. And I'm not going to go through all of the detail, except in a high-level way, so that you get a little flavor for why we think this is important to legislators and why we think this should be something that you should, from time to time, consider as you're looking at enabling laws or making laws in our state. The first thing that we found is that of the approximately 4 million people working in Georgia in 2011, 1 out of every 4 jobs were in the essential economy. 1 out of every 4. It's basically 25% of the workforce. Now, our definition of the essential economy is not unlike some of the things that John had talked about earlier. We define the essential economy by what's called SOC codes or NACE codes. They're defined on a definition that the Department of Labor provides, and there are 86 codes that we take. So for example, if we looked at a hotel, if we looked at this hotel here in Cobb County, the Waverly, we would not have counted the person that's a manager. We would not have counted the person behind the stage who is running the computer. We will only count positions where there's no credential required. So we take the maids, we take the janitors, we take the landscapers, but we don't take anyone that has a credential. So that was very carefully defined, and you can see these codes in the back of this study if you'd like. And here's what we found, that 1 out of 4 jobs in Georgia belong to the essential economy. And when we looked at the counties, and by the way, if you look at nothing else in our report, open it up to the middle, and you'll see how difficult it is to represent all 159 counties in Georgia, because it took 2 pages to show the percentage of workers in the essential economy in Georgia in 2011. And it will show you a very dramatic range, sometimes as low as about 20%, but in upwards of 35 and 38% of certain counties, that's their employee base, is the essential economy. So if you look at it, 52 counties had 27 to 40% of their workforce in the essential economy. 57 counties had greater than 24%. 37 counties had 20 to 24%, and 13 counties had 15 to 20%. But overall, approximately 1 million workers with the average wage based on a national scale of about $21,000 per year. And if you just took the sales tax alone, I saw Judson in here, Senator, a moment ago, I know he worked on these kinds of things. This group of people pays approximately $114 million in sales tax alone. That does not include house tax, that is included there with the payroll tax, just in terms of sales tax alone. It's over $100 million just from these workers. So we also found out that the essential economy workforce is independent of counties. Fulton County has a big presence, but so does Whitfield County. Chatham County has a big presence, but so does Tiff. So it doesn't matter if it's a poor county, or an urban county, rural county, the percentages of workers remains pretty much constant. We've developed some data sets that I want to share with you, and I'm not going to go into great detail, but this link we're going to provide to you. And what this is a map of Georgia in 2011. And you see he's scrolling over it, and when you hit that county right there, which is Macon, go there's right there. Okay, hit that, yes. And you can see that Macon, oh boy, looks like we got a Maps Galaxy program. That's great. This map will show you the numbers of essential county workers. There it is, over to your left. The screen is somewhat complicated up here, but it will show you the numbers of workers in Macon, Bibb County, and it will show you the percent of people that are in the essential economy. And we can do this for any county. So somebody have a county they want us to take a look at real quick? Harris County. All right. Give them some guidance. That's down by Columbus, right? Right there? Is that Harris? Okay, go to Harris. So you can see that Harris, I can't read it. But my sign, I can't read it. So it looks like it has 27% of the workforce is in the essential economy. Give us another county. Hall County, that's going to be up there to Gainesville. Go up, 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 down, 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 left, 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 right there. Is that Hall? Hey, that's not bad. So Hall is going to have 26%. Going down to Lowndes County, all the way to Valdosta, right there, yeah. Let's look at Lowndes. So Lowndes has 30% of their workforce is in the essential economy. I'm not going to spend much more time on this, but we can give this to you in elaborate detail. And let me do just one little exercise that I think is interesting. The data you're looking at right here is 2011. So if you don't mind, if you'll go all the way to the top of the screen, go all the way to 2003, keep going, click 2003. So you can see how light green and light blue 2003 is. That means there's less essential economy workers. Now go to 2011. See how it blues up? That means a more concentration, bigger numbers. So the essential economy grew over the 10-year period that we looked at it. That's why I chose pink. That's why I chose pink. Fran, we're not going to focus on colors anymore. This is all about policy now. So please, I'm glad to provide this link for you if you'd like to look a little further. We also have very elaborate data that's online. And we can look at the essential economy by sector, by county, by a 10-year cycle. We can look at it by a SOC code. We can look at it. We can actually go into a county and show you every single job that they had in a certain year. So we want to make this available to you. And Dan and I would like to come, if you'll invite us back over to the Senate or the House to brief your economic development committees or ag committees or other committees to tell you how important we think this data is for your policy making. Next. So let me just tell you what the data says, Patrick, then I think we can kind of wind this up. All right. TEE, by the way, is the essential economy. So TEE contributed 12%, or $49 billion to Georgia's GDP in 2010. TEE in 2011 employed 996,000 people out of 3.7 million employees. And by the way, let me just say again that our data came from the Georgia Department of Labor. This is not national data. This is real data reported to our Georgia Department of Labor over 10 years. So in 2011, 1 out of 4 jobs. 25% of the jobs, it was significantly present in each of the counties. I've already covered that, 25 to 39% in some counties. The average wage was $21,000, and the employees contributed $114 million in sales tax. And let me tell you what I think it means. And this is what, for you as policymakers and for the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, this is what I think is important. Number one, the essential economy is a historic and future structural part of the economy. It's structural. So that means it cannot be removed. If you take it out, bad things happen to the economy. So for example, you cannot build the Hyundai facility in West Georgia or the Kia facility without the essential economy. Because for every knowledge worker, for every engineer, you require some number of essential economy workers. People have to have a place to sleep. People have to have food to eat. People have to have their lawns maintained. People have to have their cars washed. So for every knowledge worker, there's a corresponding essential economy worker. The essential economy in political terms, or in economic terms, has three stakeholders. Number one, it's the employers. If you ask Brian Toller back there about, or anyone from the Georgia Farm Bureau or anybody from the Poultry Federation, you will hear loud and clear that this workforce is essential for them. They cannot exist without a productive, motivated workforce. The employees, 1 out of every 4 Georgians, many of them voters, are employed in the essential economy. It's important to them. And then for us, and this is the point that I kind of started with in my own thinking, it's essential to our quality of life. What these people do for us makes our lives better. When you go to a restaurant and you're served across the counter by someone, that person is providing a service to you that not only do you think is important, it's essential. And the better those people are trained, not necessarily licensed, but the better those people are recognized for their value, the better and the stronger the essential economy is. Last, in simple terms, the Georgia economy cannot exist without the essential economy. It was big in 2003. It's going to be bigger in 2015 and 2020. And for us, as people that are interested in public policy, this is something that we need to understand better. It needs your thoughtful consideration. And that's where we sort of end our story with the essential economy. We're not here to say, do this or do that. But we are here to say that you're familiar with the knowledge economy. You understand that because the Georgia Chamber and other chambers have taught you that and you believe in it. But it's also important to understand the essential economy, which is more of a legacy economy, but equally important. So that in a nutshell, Patrick, is what the essential economy is. Our report covers it in detail. It's also on our website, and we're glad to answer any questions. Thank you for your time.
Great. I first saw this presentation during a Leadership Atlanta program I was at last year, and it was fascinating and facilitated a lot of really energetic conversation. So we'll open it up to questions from the audience, but I've got a couple that I'd like to see both for you and Todd as it relates to this, is that as you look at the degree that perhaps free markets are being, it's not fair to say attacked, I don't want to use hyperbole, but perhaps there's less faith being put in the overall concept of free markets. I think part of it has its seed in the essential economy, that there's a sense there's an inherent amount of unfairness, that when you talk about free markets, you're really talking about the top of that pyramid, not so much at the bottom of the pyramid.
That's right.
Can you talk about it both, Todd, at the federal level and as well, Sam, a little bit here at the political level, but just what, and I know you say you're not trying to advocate a specific policy or not, but how can lawmakers and how can the free market movement better incorporate this group into the overall conversations about free markets?
I want to line up with John's comments. I think that John was a perfect segue for us because there are really 3 or 4 key threats to the essential economy, 3 sort of mega threats. Number 1 is not immigration. It's the aging demography in the United States. Unfortunately, people my age can't do landscaping very well, as much as we'd like to. The second threat to the essential economy is not immigration. The second big threat to the essential economy is the fact that all of your children want to be doctors and lawyers and in the knowledge economy. Your children don't want to do the work of the essential economy. Nobody's busting loose saying, hey, I got to get down to Macon and pick the melons. The third threat to the essential economy is not immigration, it's regulation, which is the point that I think John was making so powerfully. The fact is that in these legacy economies, the margins have long been fixed in the businesses. So you can't come in there and layer on a lot of regulation without really damaging the business. And the poultry people will tell you that, the ag people will tell you that, the hospitality people will tell you that, et cetera, et cetera. So regulation is a big issue, and until we have a better understanding of the essential economy itself and its importance, Patrick, it's hard for lawmakers to sort of take a step back and say, hey, we do need to be more careful about the regulatory frameworks here. We've got to be very careful about what kind of policy we put in play. It affects the workforce. It affects the cost of the workforce, et cetera, et cetera. So our main point is, again, not policy. It is to say, look at this thing and appreciate it for what it is. It's big. And the things that you do in policy do matter. The last threat to the essential economy is immigration, because immigration has been a pipeline for this kind of workforce, basically for the modern America we know.
Todd, can you share a little bit from the federal level?
Yeah, market forces sort of created the situation that we're in today. The demand for labor, jobs that folks here don't necessarily want to do, has produced this workforce that Sam has sort of outlined for us this morning. And it's the impact on the economy and the economic, and I use the term argument because I'm sorry to do so, but public policy is a series of arguments, right? We're kind of, we one side makes one argument, one side makes another. We try to come to a consensus and come to a solution. And that's what's so unique about immigration reform as an issue today, is that the business community understands and knows the structural importance to its long-term future. And that's why the voice is being used and heard in Washington, D.C. on this particular issue, and being relied on by many Republicans, especially in the Senate, who went out on a limb politically and supported an immigration reform bill. So the market forces, the economy, those arguments have to be countered with arguments, well, we don't want to reward people for breaking the law. That's a legitimate position, a legitimate argument to make. And how do we reconcile those things? And so, I would stay away from the word argue, that market forces are a counterbalance to the economic conditions that they've created, to other legitimate positions that people have to oppose or support immigration reform. Now, Sam, I think, is 110% correct on all these other issues that have sort of are a threat to the essential economy, but immigration reform is the issue of now that threatens to derail or encourage the future, perhaps, of the contribution of the essential economy to Georgia.
Any other questions?
Yes, I'm Ross Spickers from Atlanta, Georgia, and have a background in around poultry. What percentage of the essential economy is made up by illegal immigrants?
I'll tell you what we did. Dan and I were looking for the best possible data we could have, not to go after the immigration issue, but to go after a definition of the essential economy that we thought was credible. So that was kind of the number one thing we did. And so the data that we have is the data that has been supplied by the poultry industry. So if Goldkist or whoever Tyson provided the data, we have it, even if it's a very small operation. So we can extrapolate, I suppose, because our data probably contains a lot of Social Security numbers that are not correct. It probably contains ITN numbers or IDs that are not correct. But we do know that of the significant numbers of undocumented workers that are in Georgia, 800,000 or so, a lot of them show up in the industry. So I've never calculated it because I was really more interested, Ross, and then I'll make a guess. I was really more interested in why is this immigration issue such a big issue? What, for me, as I was thinking about it, what is it? And I came to the conclusion it was all about the essential workforce. That's how I began to see it. That's how I see it today. But I do think it's around 20%. How about that?
Thank you. I'm Jan Jones. I had a question.
Jan, we know who you are.
We do know. Well, I know who you are. Well, maybe not.
Yeah, we do.
Earlier, Sam, you mentioned that Americans generally don't want to do these jobs long term. And I just looked it up. 15% of Georgians lack a high school degree.
Yes.
But they're Americans.
And they're in the essential economy, right.
Another 58% don't have a college degree.
Yes.
So once they become Americans, apparently they don't want to do the essential economy. Once we legalize the 11 million illegal immigrants and they qualify for food stamps and Medicaid and Social Security and everything else, who's going to want to do the essential economy?
I think this is a very important question. I didn't cover We have a very extensive presentation on the growing numbers of people who are becoming educated, the growing aging workforce, a lot of data that we're looking at that sort of says this is why the essential economy is a pressure cooker. You know, Jan, the question you're asking is the reason we got into the business of the essential economy work, because it's going to take policymakers asking some important questions and doing some hard thinking about this. The industries themselves, if you take poultry, Ross, or if you take hospitality, they've all automated a lot of functions they can do. It's not going to be long where you will drive up in a drive-through and Siri will be your attendant and you will have an automated delivery of your McMuffin. Because automation is one way that efficiencies can be delivered and you can deal with this workforce issue. But it's not the only way. You know, for example, if you take the good work that Chick-fil-A does, since it's hometown business, I think it points to Chick-fil-A has a terrific workforce, a motivated workforce, a well-compensated workforce, a service-oriented workforce, a culture of productivity. And I mention that, Jan, because part of the responsibility for making the essential economy thrive has got to be industry-driven. In other words, the industry itself, the sectors themselves, are going to have to get better at recruiting and motivating people. And they're going to do that a number of ways. You know, if you go, for example, to your local coffee shop, and the difference in your local coffee shop, if you have one, and Starbucks, is it's not the coffee. The difference is the culture, the experience economy, what they call the Starbucks, versus sort of an old-fashioned service economy. So the essential economy sectors are going to have to do a lot of work to keep the workforce that they have. And policymakers are going to have to be very thoughtful about how that all works. I know the governor has a big interest in workforce development. Probably the essential economy workforce needs to be tied into it. Maybe the essential economy workforce should be considered transitional, but the fact is, if you look at it, it's not. It's where a lot of people stay. Well, if they're going to stay there, then we all need to be a little bit more thoughtful. If we're going to protect sort of the fundamental values of the American dream and upward mobility, then we're going to have to think long and hard about how all this works. It's a tough assignment. It is not an all or none, because people do use the essential economy as an economy of last resort, oftentimes, or forced resort, right? But it's a last resort. It's both.
The on-ramp.
So I guess what I would say is that that's the reason that we got in this business, because we thought that policymakers need to be mindful of all the pressures that are on these legacy businesses in your communities, and the pressures are great. And if Brian Tiller got up here or if Mike Giles got up here, they would tell you the same thing.
Don't you think it's difficult to compare the United States has been it's been a place where people have come, and that's what's made our country great is immigration. I mean, most of us, all of us, were originally, our ancestors were immigrants. But prior, say at the turn of the century, the 20th century, they became citizens, and they still had to work hard because, we didn't have Social Security, we didn't have Medicare,
Right.
we didn't have Medicaid, we didn't have food stamps. So they continued to labor and move up just like Americans. The difference now is you become an American, and it sounds like, from what you said, they don't want to do the essential economy. So are we just setting ourselves up for the next iteration where, industry will be saying, we need more illegals to be made Americans, but as soon as they become Americans, they have the same benefits and opportunities that we have.
Yeah, Jan, I'm going to depend on you, and I'll join you in the dialogue. I don't want to call it entitlement, but I will say this to you, that a lot of immigrants that come to the United States, they don't have a construct or a political context for equal opportunity. It doesn't exist. And so when they arrive, they're not looking for something equal. They're looking for anything. So I call it the any I'll do anything economy. And that value system is one that's at risk in our country, right? It's at risk even with our children, many of whom feel sort of entitled. Entitlement cuts across a lot of economic strata. So I do think that this is a bigger philosophical part of the dialogue, but it's not, in my opinion, it's transcended left and right. It's almost now something that's a lot more of a structural part of the new America, and what does that really mean? And I'll leave it for the left and right to figure that out. But I'm with you, but I do think this, that it's amazing, even though this entitlement context has been around for a while, you still see the essential economy doing pretty darn well. There's a lot of people working, there's a lot of productivity in it, it is a big contributor. So again, I'm going to return to my context statement. We just need to understand it better, and then people that have messages like yours need to come forward and say, how do we protect this and how do we make it stronger?
I saw a question back here.
My name is David Chastain. I live in Ackworth, Georgia. I'm also a good supporter, or longtime supporter of Georgia Public Policy Foundation. I happened to be in Gatlinburg, Tennessee last weekend. There was a football game down the road we went to. And you have, today, I saw your presentation. Now you've defined what I was seeing last weekend, and I just want you to comment. You may have something to say, may not have a lot, but if you all are familiar with Gatlinburg, I think the statistics they throw out is Gatlinburg is within a day's drive of 50% of the U.S. population. And driving up and down the highway in Pigeon Forge and walking into Gatlinburg, you hear all sorts of foreign accents. And my wife reminded me of this. We happened to be up there the year before. They are having to bring in people from Eastern Europe and Russia to work in the essential economy in Gatlinburg. And in thinking through this and listening to your presentation, the essential economy cannot move very far because of transportation cost, I guess.
That's
so
right.
If you've done any, and I'll just shut up and let you talk, comment on that versus what's happening here in Georgia to import members of the essential economy. Thank you.
Well, it's a big question, David, and I will just say this, that one of the attributes of the essential economy from the worker side, and Brian I think will validate this, is they're high growth sectors. They can grow very quickly. You can really grow these businesses very quickly. So for instance, in Gatlinburg, you can grow the hospitality industry very quickly as long as you have development and buildings and good marketing. You can basically fill those places up because people do participate in the growth of those sectors. They're attractive. But the workforce has to be there. A lot of people in the restaurant industry will tell you they cannot expand because they don't have their workforce. So again, I cannot say anything more than this. If you take any of those sectors, or you take Gatlinburg or you take Savannah, Savannah has about 35% of its workforce is in the essential economy. Not surprising. You're going to see this phenomena. So it's just up to policymakers, David, to be mindful of it. In the same way, this is the way I think about it. In the same way we're having the argument that Microsoft and IBM and others cannot compete globally without the best and the brightest, Church's Fried Chicken can't compete without a workforce. It's the same issue. It's just a different strata. And so policymakers need to be thinking about that and using the best skills we have. You know, maybe the essential economy gets smaller over time, maybe it gets bigger, but it's going to depend on how thoroughly we understand it and the dynamic that you're pointing to.
Well, our time is up, but we have the working sessions afterwards for those who would like to engage further with Todd and Sam around this. But we're very appreciative of your attention. Thank you.
Thank you all.